I will. Okay. Max began his career at Redlands as a student in the College of Arts and Sciences. He felt constrained by the limits of the traditional educational model and initiated the process of transferring into the Johnston Center in the fall of his sophomore year by taking all of his courses for evaluation. He transferred officially into the center in the spring of 2005. He relished the challenge and the opportunity to design his own interdisciplinary program. He was chosen to participate in the selective Prudian Interdisciplinary Honors Program, which complemented his interdisciplinary work in Johnston. His educational journey culminated in a Johnston emphasis entitled The List: Creative Writing, Critical Theory, African American Studies, and Spanish. He completed 136 units, 37 of which were for numerical grades and credit or the credit no credit, with a cumulative GPA of 2.988. Okay. Things to learn at your own grad review. Max took full advantage of the Johnston contracting process, taking 99 units for contract and evaluation. He spent a semester studying abroad in Mexico and Guatemala, as well as coursework and language study preparing for and reflecting upon that experience that comprised 30 units of his overall program. As Max stated in his grad contract, quote, "I taught myself how to learn. It turns out this process did not take place in the classroom. Independent studies made my education," unquote. He took 9 independent studies for a total of 37 units, all for contract and evaluation. Max's narrative evaluations are summarized below. Max came to Redlands as an aspiring writer and worked intensively on his craft over the course of his career. He focused primarily on creative writing, developing skills that his nonfiction workshop professor described as, quote, brave and sophisticated. She called Max a prose stylist who is, quote, thoroughly accomplished. His command of the language is complex and precise, and his sentences and phrasing are plastic and virtuosic, unquote. She applauded Max for challenging himself by taking formal innovation and experimentation to the very edge of coherence without ever forgetting that he was writing for an audience, unquote. Max also engaged in analytical and theoretical writing, producing work that one professor described as, quote, well-informed and, in its acuity, imagination, and cleverness, absolutely delightful to read, unquote. Max's Nietzsche seminar professor stated that Max, quote, really shone in his written work. Obviously someone who's done a lot of reading and cutting-edge theorists, Max was able to bring his Foucaultian, Derridian, and Deleuzian perspectives to bear on the great progenitor of postmodernism with very good effect indeed, unquote. Max's history professor echoed this view, noting that his final paper for the course, quote, pushed me to think about some new ideas. Few undergraduate students are able to come up with original arguments in their research papers, although this is the goal, particularly in the sophomore year, unquote. In addition to these successes, Max had some mixed results in his analytical writing projects. His government professor noted that Max's final exam was, quote, engaged politically, but didn't make the kind of cogent theoretical argument that I would have liked, unquote. Max was a politically engaged student with a passion for applying what he learned to understand the workings of global capitalism and multiple forms of oppression in deeper, more nuanced ways. His sociology professor described him as, quote, game for intellectual struggle. What was wonderful about Max as a learner was his expectation that he would be enthusiastic about everything, unquote. Max was a voracious researcher and reader who taught his professors much. As his history professor commented, quote, I often learned new material from him as he came to our meetings with new readings he had found in his research, unquote. His study abroad professor described him as, quote, an iconoclast who cherishes his ability to make each of his educational experiences his own, unquote. Indeed, Max's commitment to learning Spanish and his study abroad experience in Mexico and Guatemala were vital to his overall educational program. As his study abroad professor stated, quote, Max wants to learn how to communicate, unquote. He spent hours with her learning about, quote, culture using language, both before and after the study abroad experience. She described how Max spent hours in church with his host family, largely, quote, because he got to see things as they were for this family. I applaud his curiosity and willingness to make a few social sacrifices to gain a broader view of Oaxacan life. He was rewarded by this family's total devotion and acceptance, unquote. Max had mixed experiences with classroom learning and the dynamics of discussion. His nonfiction workshop professor noted that Max, quote, made a point of helping his classmates develop their own work in their own manner, and despite his obvious gifts, Max responded to his fellow writers with warmth and encouraging suggestions, and his opinions were valued and respected, unquote. His sociology professor called Max, quote, a dynamic presence in class discussions, raising provocative questions and expressing a keen interest in dialogue with his classmates, unquote. In some courses, however, Max, quote, rarely spoke in class, although it was very clear that he was thoroughly engaged in the course content and dynamics, unquote, as the student facilitators of one class wrote. They, quote, urged Max to be more vocal in his classes, especially those that challenged the systemic norms and values of modern culture, as he has proven himself as a leader in this endeavor, both academically and in the Johnston community, unquote. Max's leadership in these efforts occurred primarily outside the formal classroom setting, until he co-taught a course on theories of liberation during the spring of his senior year. The professor with whom he taught noted that the students in the course, quote, emphasized how good Max was at facilitating discussion. He was particularly good at shifting the conversation to include the quieter students. He made them comfortable and willing to share their ideas, unquote. She noted that Max was, quote, quite talented as a teacher, and that if he wants to go into university education at some point, he'd do very well, unquote. Indeed, as a bilingual prose stylist with a nuanced understanding of critical theory and African American studies, Max has many potential areas in which he could pursue a career within or outside the academy.
Thanks, Sarah.